Hi, and welcome to episode 70 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. It's great to be back after a couple of weeks off due to the holidays. Let's look at our bud pick of the week. We have an indica dominant called Afgoo. It happens to be one of my personal favorite strains because it so effectively addresses my symptom set. As you can see, it's also quite easy to look at. Got these flowers on an incredible deal at Pacific Northwest Medical in Shoreline, Washington, a medical marijuana dispensary for just $100 an ounce. You can't even buy a quarter ounce in state 502 recreational stores for that amount. And of course, the Washington legislature would like to change that since they don't like that competition being present. They're going to try to take this medical marijuana away from us this spring, folks, and we're going to fight back. Let's do the news now, shall we? Our top four stories are all from Washington State, where things are popping as the legislature gets ready to convene. First of all, a Washington lawmaker proposes removing marijuana flowers from medical dispensaries. That's right, one Washington State Republican lawmaker is proposing that medical marijuana dispensaries in the state stop selling marijuana. Wait, what? State Senator Ann Rivers, who really should talk to some actual medical marijuana patients about their needs, is proposing that dispensaries stop selling smokable dried cannabis flowers. Her bill would limit medical dispensaries to cannabis-infused edibles and concentrates. Rivers seems to be trying to find a middle ground between the complete elimination of patient collective gardens and dispensaries proposed by her Democratic counterpart, Senator Jean Cole Wells of Seattle, and continuing business as usual for the dispensaries, which are seen as competition by the recreational marijuana stores which have opened as I-502 is implemented in the state. Recognizing the health concerns relating to smoking marijuana, the legislature intends to prohibit the sale of products that must be smoked at medical marijuana retail outlets, says a draft of the measure. You see, the state senator's transparent ploy is that due to the dangers of smoking, smokable marijuana buds shouldn't be sold in medicinal cannabis dispensaries, but should only be sold by recreational pot stores. Now, unfortunately, the best scientific research we have, including a multi-decade study by UCLA scientist Dr. Donald Abrams, has shown us that smoking pot, even heavily, doesn't result in lung damage or cancer. It isn't linked to breathing problems and may actually help the lungs. The measure doesn't specify exactly what health concerns would result from marijuana smoking, which, of course, is Rivers' stated rationale behind banning dried marijuana from medical outlets. When it comes to reasoning, Rivers seems oddly more comfortable with intuition than with science. It is quite intuitive that smoking anything would not be good for one's lungs, Rivers said. How can anyone think that would be a healthy option? Rivers claimed her goal is to harmonize medical marijuana with I-502, the tightly regulated, highly taxed market voters approved in 2012. The real goal, of course, as has been made obvious by the press blitz concerning the supposed need to crack down on medical marijuana in Washington, is to clear the field of competition for the recreational marijuana stores and the lucrative source of tax dollars they represent to state lawmakers. According to one source in the know, Rivers' original strategy was to get current medical marijuana dispensary owners on board with her plan. But she was also listening to some 502 store lobbyists who still don't want any competition. So they came up with the no marijuana flowers in medical dispensaries idea. Both I-502 author Allison Holcomb and Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes have in recent days called for Washington State and Seattle City officials to crack down on medical marijuana dispensaries, Holcomb going so far as to suggest felony charges against the operators. The other major proposal besides Rivers' bill is that of Democratic Senator Jean Cole Wells, who wants to deep six dispensaries altogether. Under her plan, any medical dispensary that meets requirements could be licensed to sell pot for either recreational or medicinal purposes, with tax breaks on the medical products. But of course, since no new applications are being accepted for 502 stores, none of the dispensaries would meet requirements. How convenient. Rivers' plan, however, probably has the inside track since the GOP controls the Washington State Senate, and she's in a leadership position. We are told ad nauseum about the untaxed, unregulated dispensaries supposedly providing unfair competition to the 502 stores, because the overpriced, often underpowered marijuana sold in the recreational stores often can't match what goes for $10 a gram or less in dispensaries. Will greedy profiteers be able to convince the Washington legislature to shut down their competition? Stay tuned. But with Native American cannabis sales coming soon to Washington, and after that nationwide, it seems the recreational marijuana store owners are going to have a lot more competition than the medical dispensaries. Also in Washington this week, as part of the press blitz we mentioned in that first story, I-502 legalization author Allison Holcomb urges prosecuting and shutting down medical marijuana dispensaries. The author of Washington State's anemic marijuana legalization law, I-502, is defending and even urging prosecution of medical marijuana dispensaries in Seattle. Criminal defense attorney Allison Holcomb of the ACLU of Washington, who wrote Initiative 502, wrote a December 11th email to Seattle officials about their plans to create new rules for medical marijuana in the city. If escalation of sanctions were deemed appropriate, the city has authority to prosecute repeat license offenses as gross misdemeanors, initiate civil asset seizure and forfeiture, or even refer cases for felony prosecution, Holcomb wrote in the email. Seattle is looking for ways to regulate medical marijuana dispensaries. Holcomb's words were part of a chain of emails exchanged among city council members, Seattle Mayor Ed Murray's staff, and others, including Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes, who seems just as weirdly intent on eliminating dispensaries as is Holcomb. Now, Holcomb, like Holmes, purportedly opposes the dispensaries because they aren't regulated, but she also opposes regulating them. She argued against a new licensing plan in the mayor's office, which it has floated for dispensaries, hoping to leave the coup de grace, complete elimination of the shops, to the legislature in the upcoming session. Allison told city officials they already possess the authority, using existing city business license rules, to punish dispensary operators, potentially charging them with misdemeanors or even felonies. Holcomb went so far as to urge they use that authority to shut down the shops. Many believe that recreational marijuana shops, many of which charge upwards of $20 or even $30 a gram for marijuana that is often unspectacular, will never be able to compete with medical marijuana dispensaries, where per gram prices center around $10 for often superior weed. So rather than upping the game of the 502 stores, the plan seems to be eliminating the superior competition. That Holcomb is urging felony charges against providers of medicinal cannabis to seriously ill patients is particularly ironic and unattractive, given the fact that in November she took the lead on a national ACLU campaign to slash mass incarceration rates, which of course are driven by the very drug arrests that Holcomb is now urging. Holcomb claims you have to show those who favor tough drug laws that 502 can work. The fact that its sputtering start has been the source of dismay to almost anyone who's paying attention is a major thorn in her side. And she believes she has to shut down the only successful sector of Washington's marijuana market, that is the medical side, so that her over-regulated, often badly managed recreational side can flourish. That means getting rid of the competition. So that means medical marijuana dispensaries have to go, and those pesky patients who need the shops for their affordable prices and potent medicine are apparently just speed bumps on Holcomb's cannabis superhighway. If you create an entirely parallel industry that has competitive advantages like lower prices and more convenient locations, you're just incentivizing additional violations of laws, Holcomb said, blithely ignoring the fact that Colorado's and Oregon's legalization laws do exactly that. We're seeing those who are holding themselves out as medical providers selling to people who are not patients, she claimed. It's a bad idea to continue to shape laws that incentivize that kind of unfair competition and fraud. All of this unseemly begging for busts on Holcomb's part can only serve to reinforce the divisions between the recreational and medical marijuana communities in Washington state. Many medical marijuana activists say that Holcomb has completely sold out her former background of advocating for medical patients in favor of her profit-driven I-502 legacy. The selling point for I-502 is in the run-up to the November 2012 election was the legalization law was not supposed to adversely affect patients. Those who had read the law closely, of course, knew better, and they also knew that being part of the state-run recreational market would force patients into expensive, inconveniently located stores. The legislature can't pretend those who depend on cannabis to treat their medical conditions are the same as those who enjoy passing a joint at a concert, said Steph Scherer, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access, which has launched an effort called Health Before Happy Hour to lobby against merging the medical and recreational marijuana systems. Seattle Mayor Ed Murray said he's heard from patients who can't get the medicine they need in recreational stores, So shutting down all collective gardens is not the right solution, he said. On whether the two systems should be merged, Murray's office says he's not taking a position. The legislature will be looking at a plan from State Senator Jean Cole Wells, which would include a waiver from the Washington Department of Health, which will allow patients to bypass the pot tax and allow underage patients to have a provider buy it for them. Under 21 sales aren't allowed by I-502. It would create new licenses for bud tenders who have specific knowledge of medical marijuana and new testing and labeling rules for medical cannabis. Many patients and activists oppose the Cole-Wells plan, though, since it would also essentially fold medical marijuana sales into 502 stores and shut down the existing dispensary system. The plan would also create a patient registry. That's a sticking point for many activists who point out that patients who use narcotics like OxyContin don't have to be on a registry, and neither do recreational marijuana users. So why patients? Third Washington story. Seattle City Attorney wants to shut down medical marijuana dispensaries. Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes was a big supporter of Washington State's marijuana legalization measure, Initiative 502, all along. Now it seems Holmes is so gung-ho on 502, he wants to extinguish current medical marijuana dispensaries, which existed for years before recreational legalization was approved in 2012, and force medicinal cannabis patients through the state's expensive recreational pot stores. Holmes, in a policy memo on Monday, urged the Washington legislature to fold medical marijuana into the state's recreational system. He also pushed Seattle City officials to crack down on medical marijuana dispensaries, which he claims aren't following state law or city regulations. If you're a commercial medical marijuana operation lacking a 502 license, it's a felony operation, period, Holmes said. Holmes claims some of the businesses aren't operating with proper permits and that others have neglected to pay local business and occupation taxes. He said some of them opened after the Seattle City Council passed an intended moratorium on new dispensaries in the city. The city attorney said he published the wide-ranging memo to clarify any confusion about medical marijuana laws. He said he hopes his memo reframes the debate about medical marijuana. Holmes said recent court decisions make it clear that medical marijuana providers have a limited affirmative defense in court, but no other protections. His memo and statements are very in your face, and he shows no signs of conciliation. In fact, Holmes appears to be declaring war on the existing medical marijuana community, and he appears to have every intention of forcing patients to buy the overtaxed, overpriced, often underpowered weed available in the 502 recreational stores. I have talked to some medical producers who are clearly commercial, Holmes claimed. They say, are you going to make it illegal? This memo is clear. You're already illegal. And in the next and final Washington story, marijuana potency testing accuracy is being challenged in the state. The rules of Washington State's recreational marijuana legalization law, I-502, require a sample tested from every lot of marijuana. But how useful is that testing? The program is having some success detecting substances like yeast, mold, and bacteria, reports the Seattle Times. About 1 out of every 10 batches of cannabis fails and can't be sold in recreational pot shops, according to Washington State Liquor Control Board data. Potency testing, meanwhile, which measures levels of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the primary psychoactive component of cannabis, shows Washington weed is widely variable. Recreational marijuana averages about 16% THC in the state, according to the Liquor Control Board, but about 2.5% of samples test above 28%. Laboratory directors from the state's 12 licensed pot testing facilities said they are forming working groups to lobby the Liquor Control Board for more oversight of lab methods. Part of it is to invite more regulation, according to Brad Douglas, scientific director at the Workshop, one of 12 labs licensed by Washington State. Randy Simmons with the Liquor Control Board claimed that the system is off to a good start. The majority of what's out there on packages is correct, Simmons said. The lab side is emerging, according to Simmons. As it matures, I think all those things that have been missed or things we find out we should be looking for will all be changed, he said. A battery of state-required marijuana tests, including potency and microbial measures, costs $150 at the Workshop in Bellevue. Pot is ground up, weighed, and placed in a tube with solvent as the tube spins in a centrifuge for potency testing. Since Liquor Control Board rules don't direct growers on how to choose samples for testing, though, a grower can select the best-looking bud rather than a more representative sample, giving an artificially high test result. That's something someone hopes to change. Higher test results, of course, can mean higher wholesale prices for growers. Some producers think others may be falsely boosting potency test results by adding THC-rich substances. That would explain some abnormally high results in the 30 to 40% range. Flowers just don't get to those numbers by themselves. I have suspicion some people are rolling it in keef and getting high scores, said Joby Sewell, whose Auric AG company grows marijuana in Sodo. Simmons agreed that the Liquor Control Board is also concerned that growers could dip their buds in hash oil before tests. The agency is starting a secret shopper program to find out. Incognito marijuana enforcement agents will buy products from pot stores and have them tested. If the results don't closely match the label, they'll look into it. Will we see people play games? Yes, said Simmons. It happens in any industry out there. Will we catch them? Yes, we will. That's not all that's wrong with the system, though. Labs are also under scrutiny for allegedly fixing test results. There are some labs that have financial incentive to game the system for clients, according to Miller of the workshop. If producers don't like a lab's test results, they can take their business down the street. Jessica Tonani, the CEO of Verda Bio, a Seattle cannabis biotech company, bought recreational marijuana from several 502 stores and had the workshop blind test the samples. 7 out of 8 purchases tested between 3% and 7.5% different from what their labels showed, according to her numbers. In the medical world, people that do tests sometimes do pay for higher test results, said Simmons. I want to make sure that's not happening on the recreational side. But it's not even all about the THC, according to Dr. Jonathan Page, adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia and founder of a Canadian cannabis biotech company. Page sees high THC cannabis as the Everclear alcohol of the marijuana world. And according to Page, more than 100 minor cannabinoids, other than THC and CBD, play a role in marijuana's effects. What I'd like to see, Page said, is there's less of a focus on THC as a sole molecule, and more people saying I have the most potent bud, and more focus on the cannabinoid profile and the overall experience with the marijuana, according to Page. That might mean more focus on the terpenes, those compounds which create the flavor and smell of cannabis, according to Page. In Virginia this week, a new poll shows voters strongly support marijuana law reform. About 3 out of 4 voters in Virginia think that seriously ill people should have legal access to medical marijuana. More voters support regulating and taxing marijuana like alcohol than oppose that plan. A strong majority of state voters support reforming Virginia marijuana laws, according to this public policy polling survey released on Tuesday. 3 out of 5, 60% of Virginia residents support removing criminal penalties for possession of up to an ounce of marijuana and designating it a civil offense punishable by a $100 fine with no possibility of jail time. Under current Virginia law, possession of small amounts of marijuana is a criminal offense punishable by up to 30 days in jail and a fine of up to $500. The Virginia Senate is expected to consider a proposal this year that would replace criminal penalties for personal possession of marijuana with a civil fine of $100. Most voters do not support laws that saddle people with criminal penalties just for possessing a small amount of marijuana, said Rachel Young, a legislative analyst for the Marijuana Policy Project. These antiquated prohibition laws are causing far more problems than they solve. About 3 out of 4, 74%, support changing Virginia law to allow seriously and terminally ill patients to use medical marijuana if their doctors recommend it. Just 21% are opposed to that. Almost 2 out of 3, 64% of voters, said they would be more likely to vote for their state legislator in the next election if he or she supported medical marijuana legislation. Virginia's current practice of criminalizing sick people for using medical marijuana is incredibly unpopular, according to Young. State lawmakers would be wise, she said, to listen to their constituents and adopt a state-regulated medical marijuana program. In Texas this week, a decrim bill is introduced in the legislature, but sheriffs say no way. Could change be coming to the Lone Star State? A new bill which would decriminalize marijuana in Texas has just been introduced in the legislature, but the Texas Sheriff's Association has already publicly opposed the measure. The Sheriff's Association position is that we are going to oppose any effort to decriminalize marijuana or legalize medical marijuana or any of the components of marijuana, Brazos County Sheriff Chris Kirk flatly stated. The proposed legislation, House Bill 507, would reduce civil fines rather than criminal penalties for marijuana possession. Texas law currently punishes possession with fines of up to $2,000 and jail terms of up to 6 months. Now, if passed, the new bill would fine users only $100 for possession of amounts smaller than an ounce. It will be considered by the lawmakers when the holiday period ends on January 13th. It's a good government measure that will save taxpayers lots of money and free up law enforcement resources for far more serious offenses, said State Representative Joe Moody, a Democrat from El Paso. Finally this week, in Rhode Island, we learned that they are the highest state in the nation in marijuana use, according to a survey. Rhode Islanders use marijuana at the highest rates in the United States, according to this annual survey. The report originates from a national survey on drug use and health sponsored each year by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. In Rhode Island, 14% of those 12 and older, up from 13% last year, report having used marijuana in the past month. That's the highest rate in the nation, according to the National Survey on Drug Use and Mental Health. Rhode Island also led the nation in those who reported having used marijuana in the past year at 20%, up from 19%. Rhode Island is one of 23 states in the District of Columbia that now allow medical marijuana for authorized patients, and a coalition is forming in the state to make it the fifth to legalize cannabis for medicinal purposes. The survey is probably an accurate portrayal and one we've seen trending for a long time, said Rebecca Boss, Deputy Director of the Rhode Island Department of Behavioral Health Care, Developmental Disabilities, and Hospitals. The why is really hard to answer. I don't necessarily have the answers to why. Rhode Island edged out Colorado in the survey, despite the fact that the Rocky Mountain state was first in the nation to legalize marijuana for recreational sales. Colorado had the second highest number of people reporting cannabis use in the past month, at 12.7%. The survey can't fully reflect the changes in Colorado, however, since legalization of marijuana only took place in late 2012, and marijuana shops didn't open until January 1st, 2014. The survey results are 2-year averages, with the latest results reflecting 2012 and 2013. That does it for this week. Hope you will join us next week on Toke TV. Until then, stay lifted.